أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله Before we start, all the brothers can just try and get together and move and fill in all the spaces, so all the brothers are coming in. They can also get inside the tent as well, inshallah. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا. فقال النبي صلى الله وقال الله تعالى في مقام آخر: إنما المؤمنون إخوة فأصلحوا بين أخويكم فاتقوا الله لعلكم ترحمون. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: المسلم من سلم المسلمون من لسانه ويده، وكما قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So last time we talked a bit about the martyrdom of Hazrat Hussein radiallahu anhu, and before that we talked about the mosques and so on. So I want to talk about a bit about mosque and on a certain aspect, which is that sometimes what we have is that we have labels for different mosques, that this mosque is for this group and this mosque is for this group and so on. And we say, you know what, brother, don't go to that mosque. And then we should say, okay, with this, the only masajid, the only mosque that we can go to are these and these and these, and these are the ones that we should never ever go to. So when those kind of labels start coming out, then it's not a good idea. You know, those labels should be avoided, and a person should feel free to pray wherever, you know, he gets a chance. You know, if a person is passing by a masjid, you know, he should just go pray in his local masjid. It shouldn't be that he has to drive from one side of Reading all the way to the other side of the Reading just to find a mosque that where he feels he could pray in. You know, it doesn't feel right, and that shouldn't be the case. That this is a Bengali masjid, or this is a Pakistani masjid, or this is a Deobandi masjid, and this is a Salafi masjid, and so on. So all these kind of labels should be avoided. The thing is, we have to understand why there are differences within the ummah. So why, you know, what one group differs from the other. If we understand that and we understand where the differences come from, then, you know, then we'll understand and we'll be able to appreciate, you know, that it's not the differences between us and them. They're not great. It's just minor differences and so on, and a person will just overlook them. So yes, the Quran is the same. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was the same person, you know, and he gave us the deen. But yes, still we have differences and so on. But still, you know, if a person analyzes them, he will be able to understand why the differences are there. And, you know, a lot of times we have publications on this topic and that topic, you know, why people should do this and why people shouldn't do that, you know. And these publications don't really help. You know, they make the matters a lot worse. You know, what they do is they kind of brainwash people, and instead of presenting to the people a balanced opinion from both sides, they present a very one-sided argument. Now they brainwash you, and then when you go to the other side, and then you realize, you know what, there's the other side of the story, and that they have their evidences as well, you know, for what they do. And then after that, you know, you realize, you know what, that the publication and so on that you were reading, they were very, very biased. And then what happens usually, you know, when a person gets into these kind of publications, is that person gets brainwashed and he starts having ill thoughts about the other group, that these people are like this and these people do this and this and this. And whereas when that person has not even interacted with the other group, you know, he's never even been to the masjid, he hasn't even sat down with them, he hasn't even discussed anything with them, yeah, he has a full concept of who they are, what they do, and everything. You know, if a person hasn't interacted, he's never sat with the other group, you know, you'll never be able to understand what they do and why they do it. And a lot of the times, you know, this kind of leads to debates and so on. Debates aren't really helpful. Discussions are. You know, when a person's debating, it never happens that, you know, we have a debate. Two people come, you know, Mr. A and Mr. B, and they have a debate, and we're going to change our opinion at the end. It never happens. You know, before we get into the debate, we already decided which group we're supporting. Yeah, and the thing is, you know, we never give credit to the other group. You know, when they make a good point, like, you know, mashallah, that brother made a good point. You know, we say, no, it's a flimsy point. And even when debates happen, we're always trying to support our own group, and no matter what the other group says, we're still never going to listen to them. You know, not many people will change their opinion after a debate. So discussions are a lot more helpful. You know, they help the brothers and sisters see the other side and to gain understanding rather than trying to defeat one another. So if the brothers can just come inside and just sit wherever it is, you can find space, inshallah. You know, we don't want you to stand out in the rain. So just come inside and brothers, just try and get together. And inshallah, when we stand up, inshallah, we'll try and finish up quickly. So just come inside and just find a spot, inshallah. Even if you have to pray in the rain for a few minutes, inshallah, it should be alright. This is Britain after all. You know, it rains every second day, so we're used to it. So the thing that you have to understand is that when we interpret the hadith and the Quran, what are we using? We're using the text. And the other thing that we're using is our intellect. When a person uses the intellect to look at the sources and so on, there are bound to be differences. You know, the way I will look at the same source will not be the same way that you look at the same source. Even though the source is exactly the same, but because, you know, we have different mindsets, you know, we think very differently. That a point that I might think of, you might not think of the same point. You know, the point that you might think of and the way you might interpret the hadith or the Quran ayat, it might not be the same as I look at it. So when we are interpreting the Quran and hadith, there are bound to be differences. You know, it's not, a lot of people, you know, they go around and say like, we want to get rid of all these differences, we want to unite the ummah. If you want to unite the ummah, unite the hearts. You know, people are never going to agree on each and every single thing, but as long as they respect one another and they get along, that's good enough for us. Okay, the Sahaba had ikhtilaf and they had their differences, but they got along. It's something that we need to learn as well. And the other thing is that, you know, the differences that we have within the ummah, they're a source of mercy. You know, they provide flexibility. They give us the ability to, you know, look at a scenario and say, you know what, maybe we'll go to a different opinion. You know, maybe this opinion doesn't really suit us for our needs and so on, so we'll go to a different opinion, which is a valid opinion as well, and we'll take that instead. So these kind of things help. So, you know, so it gives us the ability to be able to look at one scenario and to be able to analyze it and to be able to look at it in different ways. So that's in the way that it works. Now, Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi, he was, you know, when he compiled the Muwatta, he was given a chance by the ruler of the time that we will take your Muwatta, we'll make copies of that, and we will send it around the Muslim world, and we will tell everyone to follow your understanding of the Muwatta. Because Imam Malik, what he has done, he's compiled the hadith, and usually underneath the hadith, he gives a very simple understanding of that this is what the masala and this is what the understanding from the hadith is. So he was given the chance by the ruler to be able to, you know, take his book, have that published, and have that distributed around the Muslim world, and so that everyone could have the book in the first place, and at the same time follow his understanding as well. When Imam Malik was given this option, he said, no, I don't want this. You know, I don't want everyone to follow my understanding. You know, the people have taken the understanding from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they have their differences. You know, so I don't want to get rid of those differences. The differences existed from before, and if we're going to try to get rid of them, we're going to make things a lot worse. You know, we don't want to make everyone restricted on one opinion on a certain thing. You know, there are differences, and we're more than happy to have those differences. And the Sahaba had the differences, so who are we to try and get rid of those differences? You know, it's not going to happen. So in terms of, you know, when we're looking at the text and so on, the first thing that happens is that when we look at the sources and so on, the first thing that we look at is that, is this a valid source or not? What are the valid sources according to us? For example, Hadith Mursal, according to the Hanafis, you know, we accept that. And the Hanafis will accept the Hadith Mursal, which means is that if if a person hasn't given the name of the companion, it doesn't matter to us. Even if we don't know who the companion is, who he narrates the hadith from, but it doesn't matter because we know the Sahaba are all reliable. So even if we don't know who the Sahabi is within the chain of narration, we'll still take that to be a reliable source. Some other scholars, they won't take that to be such reliable and say, we'll keep that to the side and we'll try to look for other sources first. In the same way, the Hanafis, what they do is that they give priority to a weak hadith over qiyas and intellect and logic. So if there is a weak hadith, they just give that preference and say, okay, we do have this hadith, it might be weak, but we'll take that and we'll use that for something. But even the Hanafi, they don't take there are conditions as well, and they don't take a very, very weak hadith. So, it can be a bit weak, but if there is nothing else to go with, then they'll take the weak hadith and they'll use that because they have nothing else to do. So instead of using your own mind and saying, okay, let's make up something over here, okay, we do have a hadith, we'll try and use that and try and come up with an explanation. In the same way, the scholars, they differ according to what is reliable. Who, in terms of chain of narrations, they have different levels of standards. So for Imam Bukhari, rahmatullah alayhi, he has his own standards that he wants each and every single hadith to be, for it to be able to fit into his book. So he had his own set of standards. In the same way, other scholars have different sets of standards. That okay, I'll put into my book every hadith which is of this type, and I'll accept that. So because people have different standards, and they differ on their standards, so that's why we're bound to have differences and so on as well. The other thing is that sometimes a hadith or a certain aspect of the deen doesn't reach a certain scholar, so that's why they won't take that into consideration. So it does happen. No one can claim that they know everything and they've read the books from cover to cover and there isn't a book that they haven't covered. No one can make that claim that they know everything about the deen. So it's only logic that a person maybe he hasn't understood something, or maybe something hasn't reached him, and that's why he can't take that into consideration. So sometimes what happens is that hadith doesn't reach that person, or sometimes the other thing is that it does reach the person. The hadith reaches the person, but maybe they interpret it in a different way. So this is like I said at the beginning, that we have the same hadith in front of us, but I look at it in a different way and you look at it in a different way. So those things are bound to happen. And so, for example of this is Imam Shafi rahmatullah alayhi. He was born in Palestine, and after that he studied, and then he went to Iraq, and then he studied more there, and then he had a lot of followers, and he had his own opinions. And then when he goes to Egypt and he studies there and he teaches there, he forms and he changes his opinions. So that's why we have two opinions of Imam Shafi, Qawl al-Qadim or Qawl al-Jadid and so on, that the old opinion and the new opinion of Imam Shafi. So we have these kind of things within the scholars, that scholars, as your knowledge grows, as your understanding of something grows, you will most likely change your opinion on things. The way I used to look at different things, will be very different to how I look at it now. So it's only, it makes sense that people do change their opinion over time according to the knowledge and so on. And the other thing is that, even nowadays, the scholars, they will issue a fatwa, and then later on, if they realize, maybe I didn't consider this aspect. So what they'll do is that they'll go back and they say, I'll take my fatwa back, and this is the new fatwa, and I want to take the old one back. So these kind of things still do happen in the modern day world. And the other thing is that, okay, we have the hadith and so on, and sometimes what happens is that the hadith, they apparently contradict one another. That in one hadith we have one thing, and another hadith we have something which contradicts it and goes completely against it. So we have to try and find an understanding which kind of reconciles and makes both of the hadiths work. So if we can do that, then we try and do that. If we can't, then we need to prefer one over the other. So for example, if we have two hadiths which seem to contradict one another, we look at which one's the latter and which one's the former. Because over time and over Islam, things did change. For example, people at the beginning of Islam, they were allowed to drink. It's just that they couldn't drink when they were coming for salah and so on. Later on, slowly, alcohol, you couldn't drink it anymore. In the same way, salah as well. People when they at the beginning of Islam, when they used to pray, a person could walk in and he says, okay, what we're praying, how many rakats have already been done and so on. They could say, give salam to one another. So they could talk a bit during salah. And slowly as it went on, it got stopped, and we were prevented from talking within salah. So sometimes what we do is we look at the hadith and we try and find out which one is the earlier hadith and which one is the later hadith. So sometimes this helps and this works it out. The other thing is that, okay, if we find out which one's the latter and which one's the former, then we try and give preference to one over the other. So in terms of that, we look at many different factors. One might be the chain of narration. Now, which hadith, we have two hadiths, this one has a stronger chain of narration, so we'll give preference to that over the other. The other one might be, okay, the chain isn't so strong, but at the same time, it fits with everything that we've been understanding from the other hadiths and with the Quran ayats and so on. So we'll say, okay, you know what, we'll leave the other hadiths to the side and we'll give preference and we'll choose this hadith and we'll rely on that and we'll start practicing upon that. So these are some little things, that need to be taken into consideration, that these things do happen. The other thing is that the Arabic language, a lot of the times, a person, if he looks at the translation and he tries to interpret the Quran and the ayat and the hadith and so on, he's bound to go wrong, because the Arabic, sometimes what it has is that there are certain phrases, there are certain expressions, sometimes the word can have multiple meanings and so on, and when you translate that into English or another language, what you have to do is that you'll have to take one meaning and you'll have to translate that as. So what you essentially done is you got rid of the other interpretations that were there. So when the average person looks at the hadith as brothers, it says this within the hadith. Whereas when he looks at the Arabic, maybe he'll be able to understand, yeah, okay, this interpretation is from there. At the same time, this hadith can also be interpreted this way to make this understanding as well. So when we translate, then these kind of things are removed. So in the same way, for example, we have a command in we have amr and we have a command in Arabic, and so we have different types of command. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says do this, it doesn't always mean that it becomes fard and it becomes wajib and a person has to do it all the time. There are different types of commands within the Quran. So sometimes it's to show that this is necessary for you and this is something fard and this is something wajib. At the same time, sometimes it is just to show that something is good, and if this person does it, he gets reward. But at the same time, if he doesn't do it, there isn't any sin for that person. It's just mustahab and it's recommended. At the same time, sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give an order and tell you to do something, but it doesn't really mean that you literally have to do that. It just means that you are permitted to do that. For example, وَإِذَا حَلَلْتُمْ فَاصْطَادُوا, that when you are free from ihram and the state of ihram, go and hunt. How many of us go and hunt after we've done Hajj and Umrah? No one does it, because the command is there, but we don't interpret that to be literally a command, which just means that no, you have the permission to go and hunt and so on. So the restrictions that you had within the state of ihram, they no longer apply. So these kind of things, a person does have to understand Arabic. When a person doesn't understand Arabic, and when the average Tom, Dick and Harry picks up the Quran and Hadith and they want to rely on the translation, you are bound to go wrong. You are bound to go wrong. A lot of people, they pick up one or two Hadith books and so on, and they study those and they think, what, mashallah, we're shuyukh now. Come on, you're jokers, you're clowns, If you think you could study 2-3 books and you could have a good understanding of the deen, it's just a joke. You need to come back to reality. The scholars before us just gave their entire lives, to be able to understand the deen, and then they came up with their opinions. And we think, we could study 1-2 little books and we could stand up in front of people and we could give our opinions and we could say, brother, you're doing this wrong and you should be doing this. It doesn't make sense. Like I studied 6 to 7 years, studying 8 hours to 12 hours a day for 5-6 days a week. I did that for 6 and 7 years just to have the title of being a called scholar. And before that, you're not reliable enough. You're not authentic enough. No one considers you to be professional. In the same way, we understand a bit of the deen, and we think, just because we've been doing the basics of the deen, we understand the deen. Now, for example, let's take the example of driving. I've been driving for, let's say, a year. Another brother's been driving for 30 years. Now, he might be a better driver than me. It's possible, yes. But at the same time, if I'm a mechanic, I'll know more about cars than that person. Even though he's been driving and dealing with cars for so many years, but because he's been doing exactly the same thing every single day of his life, once he might know a few things here and there, he might know how to change a tire, he might know how to change the oil and so on, but when it comes to the different things, he doesn't know what's going on. So that person to say, I understand more about cars than you, is delusion. So when it comes to each and every single thing, we go to the experts and we could consider them to be experts. But when it comes to the deen, just because we practice a few aspects of the deen, we consider ourselves to be the experts. So we need to take a step back and say, what, we'll let the scholars deal with that, and we'll just rely on the scholars. Okay, and if you don't understand, go to the scholar and ask them, okay, Imam Sahib, I don't really understand why you do this in this way, and I've heard this and this and this, and ask them, and they'll be able to help you out. But instead of sitting back and saying, the Imam Sahib, he said this and he said that, and I don't agree with him, and we have our own discussions afterwards and so on, it doesn't help. It's not productive, and it's just complete foolishness. The person sits back and he has discussion with other people, and then he doesn't really go to the scholars. You know, you have a link with the scholars are more than happy to help you all the time. I think we'll stop there. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to understand that the differences within the opinions, the minor differences, and even if we do try to get rid of them, it won't happen. The Sahaba had their differences, and we will never be able to get rid of those differences. But the one thing that the Sahaba had for another is respect. Respect for each and every single person. That, okay, I don't agree with that person, but he has his opinion, I will respect him. So that's what we need to do as well, that we need to be united. We should be able to feel free to be able to interact with the people from other groups and other sects, as we say, and just put these labels to the side. They don't really mean much. Okay? People have different interpretations, and their interpretations are usually valid, and they have some kind of basis as well. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala get rid of our perceptions, give us a better understanding of the deen, and keep us firm on the deen, inshallah. And make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us unity amongst the ummah, inshallah. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين. أما بعد، فيا معشر المسلمين، أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد بعدد من صلى وصام. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد بعدد من قعد وقام. اللهم صل على جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى سائر الصحابة والتابعين وعلى عبادك الصالحين. اللهم أيد الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر من نصر دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم واجعلنا منهم، واخذل من خذل دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا تجعلنا منهم. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه، وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا، وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من الراشدين. اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات. عباد الله رحمكم الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. واذكروا الله يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. Please straighten your rows and try and get closest to one another as you can. Please fill in all the gaps. Yeah, sure.